difficult. We
There's
have
a
done
lot-
so many.
There's a lot of episodes, so I'm sorry that I'm putting you on the spot, but let's see if you remember it. Don't worry, I'll give you the answer if you don't.
Maybe it was the one about Czech Republic?
Exactly, you're right. In our third episode of the Connected by Language podcast, we sat down with somebody that had a very interesting situation. It was somebody that already had a lot of Russian language experience, and out of a sudden, I had to survive in the middle of the Czech Republic, figuring out the language there. So we're gonna do something a little bit different. We're gonna do the opposite of this, where we're gonna take somebody that has been living in the Czech Republic for so long, but has dedicated his life into learning the language of Russian. But this little bit of an experience not only has found out very interesting ways into figuring out an entire language on your own, but what happens when the language that you've been just speaking for hobby becomes something that actually matters in a very dire situation? We're going to explore both things today on this episode, thanks to our wonderful guest, Petr. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Hi, welcome. I'm very excited to learn about your own Russian language adventure, because I think a lot of people, especially for Russian being a language that is fairly popular among all the broader language learning community, might have something very special to take it into their own, I guess, mindset as we go forward. But before we do that, actually, I want to ask you a little bit of a question. Can you give us maybe a little bit of a personal journey and what you're all about?
Sure, I would start with what I do professionally. So I work in linguistics as a freelancer, offering various services such as proofreading, editing, translating, a little bit of language tutoring as well. And I have a few interests. Language learning is one of them. Playing the guitar is another, as you might maybe see behind me. And these things are a bit connected too. We might get to it later.
Music and languages often do go hand in hand in a lot of different ways. So I'm very excited to see how you personally are using the language and music, but maybe it's a little bit later. I would like to ask you more about your growing up and your relationship with languages. So I may ask you, growing up, like, how did you see the concept of languages, and what type of role did they play in your early life back then?
Great question. Well, I would say until the age of maybe 20, it was really just a subject. By that, English. So I basically started learning English in the 90s in the Czech Republic, and back then, me and a lot of my schoolmates, we didn't really feel that this language could be useful in some way. So I remember I was struggling, like I didn't have the worst grades, of course. To be honest, many times in my life, I found myself surprised that I actually reached my level of English. If I look back and remember those days at primary school, secondary school, when I was more or less struggling.
And what actually changed that picture of languages for you?
Right. It was certainly the internet and the first, I would say, prehistoric language exchange sites, because we didn't speak about applications back then. But
it was a completely different time back then, which
Yeah.
I do not know of. So it's
well, it's like 20 years ago. There was a very famous and popular site called ShareTalk by Rosita Stone. I believe it doesn't exist anymore. It was very simple, very basic. But what you were able to do was that you could log in and you could start chatting to another person, and you could choose. You saw like where the person was from. So just a few clicks and you could chat to someone from Brazil, from Africa, from Asia. There was also a very basic voice chat. And so I started to like this exploring of the world, talking to people from completely different parts of the world. And I enjoyed making sentences, being understood, learning something new. So that was big breakthrough.
And if languages were not really like your thing until then, how did it change? How did you actually get to the Rosetta Stone page that you just talked about? How did the transition happen?
Well, probably some curiosity, which has always been within me. And I also remember I started to travel a bit, so it went hand in hand, these things together.
And it's interesting because, like, in this type of perspective, like, one thing that I thought was very interesting that you said was that you thought that English was not that useful for the future, which is something that, at least when I started like learning English, it was the complete opposite. It was always presented as like the key to finally achieving freedom if you don't learn your English right. Now, a lot of people in my, like, at being in school, of course, not everybody's gonna be like conforming to that, and it's not that everybody likes learning English as much, or it's a subject like everybody, like every other ones for a lot of people, but it was presented in a very different way. It's interesting to see, because I'm not really sure how like Germany felt about the English language.
I think in school it was not a thing yet that you could really think about then traveling, being able to communicate to other cultures of the world. I don't remember any of that. It was really just a subject to me. But I think maybe it's also the age gap.
Oh, probably, like, because at my time, like when I was starting learning English, like the very early stages of the internet were already over. Like people already could grasp the concept of someone not from Italy talking to you online. It was not like this like grassroots thing. Of course, it was not like nowadays where you can go on an app like Tandem and just like find bajillions of people from all over the world ready to talk. But it was at least understood that there's a world out there, and it's not that hard to explore it. You know, I don't know if I got this concept through, but
I think for me, actually, it was more, and maybe it was similar to you, Petr, that we were talking about neighbor countries. So that was more the thing. So it was not about the internet, because it was not really existent during the time that I went to school, or it was existed, but we didn't use it as a tool.
Not as much for sure.
Exactly. And then it was all about learning French, for example, because we were not living so far from the French border. So the first language exchange I ever did was not like on Tandem online, but it was really like going with my school class to France and then meeting people there. And there it was all about communication and being able to communicate to the French people. So that was like the first time it really made sense to learn a language.
I see. And it's also very interesting to see like how this old like versions of language exchange work, because like in nowadays my first thought is how do they securely know where people are coming from? I could just put whatever I want in. Like I guess back in the day there was a lot of quirks to find, but it's interesting that you could like get things like voice chat from around the world already like somewhat consistently. That's a lot more impressive than people might realize. But now, like, your situation was interesting. Now, you were someone that didn't really quite got a lot of interest in languages. You found this gold mine of people from around the world. But I would assume, knowing your story, that one language maybe, let's just say, stood out from the other. So my question becomes like, why did you but much more like when did you decide to take on Russian as a language to begin with?
Much later, basically when I turned 30, I would say, around that age, 10 years ago.